So we're going to get started here. We're going to talk about markers that are set initially flat to the ground or slightly raised, and we're going to raise this marker up that's sunken a bit and get it to be the right height and then regrade around it. And so flush markers are markers that were designed to be set flush with the ground. Flush markers are distinctly different than raised markers. At least historically, they were meant to be, because raised markers project out of the ground, and normally you'll level them and plumb them just like you would a base on a monument, but they tend to have a slant face on them. Now a larger the next step up would be what's called a slant marker, which is a kind of a version of a raised marker. But these are called flush markers. Historically, they commonly were often referred to as grass markers because they are not meant to be leveled. They're meant to stay with the contours of the landscape. There are some modern cemeteries that are called memorial parks, and they have only flush markers in them. And these became popular with Hollywood Cemetery, I believe, in California was one of the first really big ones. And so it's much easier to do maintenance on them. And all of the markers in those memorial parks are flat to the ground, generally today granite, or sometimes bronze plaques connected to either concrete or granite. So we're looking at a veteran's stone here, and it's dated, the death date is 1989. Usually these are provided by the government for people that served in service. There's different exact stipulations, but anyhow, these are provided as part of their service to the country. And so there's also usually some amount of money that is provided to the person to accept delivery, mark it out, and install it. But over the course of time, this is settled, and so we're going to raise this up a little. And so we're going to come over here, and we're going to grab a spade shovel. And the first thing that I'll say also is that most commonly there could be some variation, but these are usually 4 inches thick, which is quite robust, especially when it's a granite. And the most common size for a single grave flush marker is 2 feet by 1 foot by 4 inches thick. They weigh about 110 pounds, believe it or not. And if you move over to a black color, they will actually be about 10% possibly heavier. Black granite is more dense than most grays. And some of the colors, there's a variation. Granite weighs about 185 pounds a cubic foot, so it's quite heavy. So we're going to want to remove this from the hole, and then we're going to see what's under it. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, if I can just go under it like that, which I can, it's always a good thing. Sometimes we come in and it's really hard clay, or there's rocks, and we just don't get a lot of, depth in the soil. One time I was in Texas and I got about a ½ inch, and they all started laughing at me. So I'm going to come over here, and actually I could take this other shovel now just to support this while I come around, so I can literally just grab this. Now we're not going to lift this. I don't have to lift it, and I can pivot it, and it's a lot easier to do that than lift it. And so we'll talk about what we see in a moment. I could have certainly brought some blocks, but for one stone like this, I don't need it. And so you see the way I never lifted it. I could if I had to, but I avoid lifting it because it's heavy. Okay, so it's in really good condition. Overall, it just has some soiling. But now we'll see what's going on here. And is there anything under it? Not sure if this is native soil, but it's because I've never dug a hole here before, but it doesn't seem like there's a foundation at all. And so it seems like they just laid this stone right into the ground. Usually we would put a crushed stone foundation under this style installation, but anyway, we're going to move forward, and I'm going to take the spade shovel, okay, and what I'm going to do is open the hole a little now, because it will never fit exactly in that, so we need to make it about 1 inch or 2 bigger all around. And then we're going to remove this loose soil, and then we're going to take some gravel, crushed stone, and we're going to raise it up a little, and then we're going to work on resetting it. Now we could put a little tarp down or a piece of plywood, but we'll just clean up the area after. It's not a big lot of dirt here, and it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so I'm just going to get a little bit of this loose out. I want to get a little depth so we can get some more gravel under it. So I'll go a few inches down. Now there's no one exact depth. If we're going to put a gravel foundation, I mean, we could go a few inches, more like setting pavers, patio blocks. I mean, we could go 6 inches under it. The stone's about 4 inches. So there's some variability. I'll also mention that if we're on a hill, it could be one-dimensional hill or two-dimension. In other words, it could slope one way or slope two ways. And what that'll do is we'll have to go with it once we regrade it so it blends in. So we don't want, the goal is to have this flat with the top of the grass. However, what we have now, and I can actually use this as a straight edge, and if I lay this bar here down, we can see we have a big valley here. And so we shouldn't have a valley around it. And that's probably from them edging over the years to keep the stone visible. But we'll raise this up so the stone sits here, and then we'll regrade this valley, and then it will just flow right into the landscape. It'll look much nicer, and when the grass grows in, it'll be really good. So I'll take a little, sometimes you have to put it in the hole and take it out once, and it's a little tricky when you have so much. Like you can see, here's the level of the grass, and then it drops way down here, and so it's kind of stepping down. So ideally, we don't have that effect, and it flows right in the landscape, and the mowers can go right over it, and there's no issues. We definitely don't want to have any high spots. Like if one corner projects a little high and sticks out of the ground, it's likely, depending on the angles the mowers come from, they'll hit that corner. It'll damage the mower blade as well, but it'll chip the stone. Okay, so I'm going to continue and just get this loose dirt out. Just make a little pile here. Now also, in bigger objects, or if we take a little more time, we can separate the topsoil or the grass if it's really good grass. But this will work out just fine. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now we have a kind of open hole here. I'm just going to come in, use the human tamper here. This is where high body mass will help you a little. It'll be a better tamper. We could take a mechanical tamper here. It's not necessary. The ideal when you're doing foundation work is not to disturb more soil than you have to, and to go on top of the native soil, and to not put loose fill back in, if at all possible. And again, this could be redone later. Now, why don't we want to come in here and do it once and do it right and put in a hard cement? That's the thinking. Because what'll happen over the course of time is that it'll settle again and things will change. Also, the concrete can have detrimental effects to some stone, especially the marble. So it's not going to be reworkable. If we put concrete around it and it gets hard, it's going to be hard to work and fix later again to reset, because there's going to be a tendency for the stone to settle over the course of time, regardless of what we put under it. There's going to be a buildup of sediment that happens slowly under big trees from leaves and debris and all the forces in nature. And so we want to make it so it's reworkable. Okay, so we're going to, right here we have some pea stone and some sand. We're going to raise this up a little. Now, depending on how big the buildup you're doing, pea stone is certainly an option, but if you're building things up a lot, a crushed stone or a coarser gravel is also another option. And the bigger the buildup, the bigger the gravel can be. Ideally, I like a crushed stone that is sharp, because when it runs through the crusher, the gravel all has sharp edges on it, and it packs really well together. And usually you can use crushed stone as one material. So what we're going to do here is we're going to mix this pea stone with some of this sand, and I'm going to try to churn it up a little, and then we're going to tamp it out a little, and see how good my eye is. I mean, we can try to measure here, but this is going to throw our eye off a lot, so we have to kind of plan where we want it to be. So this is a little trickier than something that just settled straight down, because it's a big kind of divot and low spot. Okay, so we can use a lot more gravel than you think doing this in many situations. So I'll use that one up. Might just have enough here. We'll see how we do. And certainly we could also use a mechanical tamper of some type. But actually, with a spade shovel like this, if the sand is damp, it will tend to fill the voids really well. And so the idea also of the gravel and the sand combine, and so the sand fills the voids. And so I set a lot of markers. When I used to do monument installation, sometime I left with a few dozen on my truck. And so this was going back to the 80s, 90s. Don't do that many flush markers today because I'm working more on the historical stones, but brings back a lot of memories. So now sometimes these are set on a hard concrete foundation, but that would be done in advance and not bonded to the stone. So I want to make that clear that concrete work on modern monuments is very, usually a foundation is created ahead of time, but it should not be bonded to the actual stone, and then we can work around it in the future. Okay, so that's looking really good, and we'll see how good my eye is. And it's going to be a little high visibly, but when we bring it in from the slope here, where it's kind of a little bit of a valley, we're going to probably get a really good end result. Okay, that looks really good. It's going to be slightly easier for me to work on the bottom, so I'm going to just pull this back a little. I'm going to show you how we can move this stone. Everything that I do is going to be with the least amount of effort, and so that, you know, we can conserve our energy and not risk you know, hurting ourselves. So when we don't have to pick things up, we don't. Okay, so we're going to come over here. I'm going to come back up. If I put this on a block, it would have helped a little, but no big deal. And so this is perfect condition other than some minor staining. I'm going to walk it. You can see the way I'm moving it. It's a lot easier to watch a lot of this than to try to explain it, because if you see it done, then you can imitate what I do. And so we're going to lay this down in the hole. Okay, that's pretty good. It's really good on this side. I like the way this is coming right up to here. Still diving in over here. And I have like wood stakes and things, but we can use this. And you can see it's still a bit low here. And it's even dropping down a little. So the next step we can do is I could use a shovel or this bar, and I'm going to come like this. Okay. And I need a little more gravel. So I used all the gravel here. This is sand. So we could just break for 1 second. We can use sand instead of gravel, but sand will tend to liquefy more when it gets wet. And so I want to use primarily gravel and then bind it together with the sand. So more gravel's better. If you're going to use one material, crushed stone is the best material. Crushed stone, they'll crush it, you'll get sharp gravel, but then the cinders fall through, and that's part of the crushings or the fines. And different parts of the country have different types of crushed stone. And in New England, where I'm from and based, we have more granite. As you get into the middle of the country, it's usually more limestones. They're both fine, and usually it's like, what's a really good material to use for this type of work certainly is the last level of material they put before they're going to pave a road. But not if it's reconstituted, not if it's ground up asphalt, but if it's just a straight typical version. Around me, they'll call it small processed, which is like up to 3/4, 5/8 or 3/4 inch gravel down to like fine sand. And it's all in one material, and it's much less expensive that way. And you can get a yard or two of it from like a quarry, and it's cost about the same thing as 5 bags or something. And so it's much, much less expensive. What I would recommend anywhere they're going to do a lot of work is to get a small pile of a crushed stone, ideally, and then you could work out of that pile, and that way you could save a lot, and you don't have to keep going to the lumber yard or hardware store or wherever you're getting the supplies. I've heard it called number 57. I've heard it called every part of the country they have different names, but again, around me they tend to call it small process, and the large process is up to 2.5-inch rocks with also the cinders, and they'll do the first rough paving like with that, I mean getting ready to do the paving, compaction, and then they'll put on the finer stuff and really tamp it down, and then they pave over that. And so, but again, it has different names. It's not that specific, but I don't like pond pebbles that are rounded because they don't pack well, and so sharp rock is better, sharp gravel. So I'm going to come here with this bar, and any bar would work for this application also. Any kind of pry bar virtually, and also a spade shovel is the best tool for this. That has a straight blade on it, and I'm going to pack it really well. A lot of this is disappearing in the ground. I'm also going to work and look at alignment in a moment. Okay, I'm going to go a little more here with this. We do want to leave some room to regrade, certainly. Okay, now it's going to stay in place, and I'll come back to that side. And the reason a spade shovel is better, if we use a pointed shovel, it will tend to not go under, it'll hit the edges. And so these are great for many applications, but doing work like this, a spade is definitely preferred. See the way I angle it a little? We can also get better compaction. If I go toward the corner of the tool a little bit, it'll dive in more. And so we're really trying to pack this really well, because this will keep it in the position it's in for a long, long time. So if we just drop it on some gravel and don't compact it, it won't last so well. And so what I'm going to do now is just lightly brush this off, and then I'm going to back up and look down the row and sight it for alignment. It looks really close, which is sort of amazing. So we had a pretty big hole and I kind of laid it in there. We can also pull a line, like a dry line, or you can use a long tape measure sometimes, but it's best to use some type of, any twine really works, and a couple sticks. But there are, like a chalk line that doesn't have chalk in it, could be considered a dry line, and that is just faster to roll up. And a couple old screwdrivers or whatever, you want to stick one in the ground so we could pull that line out taut. And also I'll mention that if this was surveyed and there was markers, especially if we were doing a monument installation, sometimes we'll go from point to point. If it's lot 237, there's in some cemeteries a pin that says 237, or at least a mirrorstone or a stake or something, and we'd pull a taut line along those stakes. With setting markers, usually we're going to go in the existing row, and so just like we have here. And it looks really good overall. A little more gravel here. I'm just going to finish up this bucket, tamp it a little more, and then we'll work on regrading it. So we put, buckets weren't full to the top, but we put a couple of buckets under and around this of gravel with some sand mixed in. I'm using mostly gravel now. That's looking really good. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just bring in the edge here so I can hide all this loose gravel into the hole. I'm also going to kind of tenderize this high spot a little. I'm trying to blend this in so it's going to like go right with the landscape. And the thing about this, there's nothing you can mess up. And if you put it in the heights wrong, you just have to take it out and spend a little more time. Take your time and try to, you know, get it so you're happy with it. And not a rush. There's nothing that's going to harden up. There's no cement. We can always come back and rework this later. Okay, that's pretty good all around. So we want to avoid, we could probably go a little higher actually, but we'll stop right where we are because it's kind of on a slope. Now, the sandy under soil kind of blended in with the topsoil, but I'll just kind of pluck out these pebbles as I go, and we'll make it look nice. Now, it's not a bad idea, in addition to having the crushed stone, to have a topsoil pile available, and that helps out a lot with you know, regrading and things like that as well. But so what I'm going to go bring this in a little like now. And we can just tamp it out. We're going to kind of brush it out and give it a light cleaning at the end as well. We could have cleaned it really thoroughly while it was out of the hole. That would be another option. but it would get dirty again when we put it in. This stone is granite, gray granite, but it's an unpolished granite. So unpolished granite is going to tend to hold staining a little more than, it'll get stained easier and hold it, be harder, a little harder to clean than a polished granite. Yeah, the thing about this kind of work is that it's a lot like work, as the sweat is starting to drip from my brow, but I find I don't have a need to go to a gym, and nor do I have time for it. Very physical work, so even a little marker like this, it's all, you know, shoveling, and the kids today don't like to use shovels too much. It's funny, been working in graveyards for, you know, over 30 years, and no one's ever stolen a shovel. I always say that it means that they're going to have to work if they use it. So, not a popular thing. Power tools may be a different story, but shovels, I don't think the kids know how to start them. They don't know where the engine is. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. What I'm going to want is a brush. Of course, I don't have one in reach here, but almost any brush that we used earlier would suffice. Although, like a whisk broom brush would be good for the loose dirt, but just any kind of brush. And I'll give it a light cleaning. The thing is, if this isn't complete, if we put too much water on this, it'll tend to make mud around the perimeter. But certainly we can give it a light cleaning. And it could even theoretically go a little higher, but I want to make sure the mowers don't hit it. So, someone going to grabbing a brush maybe? Thank you. Should have had that ahead of time, but we were trying to keep going here. So we're looking pretty good all around. And so we're going to have some excess soil. That's pretty typical. We can either take this away, or certainly if there's any sinkholes or really low spaces that are close by, then oftentimes, usually that's not hard to find. Graves tend to settle over time, and so we're either going to remove it, put it in the buckets is probably...
I'll clean it up later.
Well, I'm waiting for a brush anyway. So what I'll do is just put it in the bucket. Then we can either bring it to a dirt pile or find a low spot to fill in. Pretty good soil, but it has some, you know, gravel mixed in, but yeah, that's okay. This is not really for this, but it's actually good for this, but we could use a little water. I guess we don't really have to get into that because we already did cleaning. So this is actually ideal. This is actually called a churn brush, and it's for hitting cement after you. So do we have any water at all? No, we didn't bring over that either. That basically concludes the resetting aspect, and then just a light cleaning. But you can see how it's much closer to the grade now. I mean, the back seems almost perfect. The front is maybe diving in a little. So if we went higher, then we have to do more regrading. So it's always a balancing act how far we go. But that's a bit about it on basic resetting of a sunken flush marker. So I hope that helped educate people about the process. Thank you.